Did my 6. What's up, guys and girls? Welcome back to another video from Homesteading Off the Grid and whatever the hell this channel's about. I have a pretty creepy story for you today. Here it is. We're in the month of October as of this recording. Getting out here kind of early. Here it's afternoon when I'm making this video, even though I'm going to upload it in the evening or publish it in the evening. Because we know how that veil grows thin. And we know how things can be super creepy up here in the woods on those. Dark October nights. Speaking of which, I'm going to do this at the beginning of the video, and I'm only going to say it once, okay? This is my channel, but I know this pisses a lot of people off for some reason. Out of respect for those folks, I'm only going to say this once in this video. I'm going to get it out of the way now. Bigfoot Sasquatch Files, Volume 11. A Bigfoot Sasquatch Halloween special is now available on Amazon in both print and Kindle. The link is in the description box below. What a special treat Volume 11 is for those of you who have been following the saga 1 through 10 so far, the first anthology. None of our repeat characters show up in this one because this truly is a Halloween special. All of the Bigfoot Sasquatch stories are centered around Halloween. So we won't see Dr. Honorary, Drake, or Jane, or Burt Reynolds. You know, the cop. I know, I hear like, Burt Reynolds, he was a bandit. Hey, different storyline, different series. So, there you go. Now, with that said, we're going to launch into this story. This is something that happened 6 years ago. And though it didn't happen in the month of October, it happened in the month of January. It's certainly creepy enough to be told in October because it's a ghost story. That's just the facts. It's a ghost story. I want to give a shout out to one of our viewers down in Georgia, a lady named Carrie D, who's always given me great advice about drinking water or coffee when I make these videos. Every time I see her comment, because she says that at the end of every comment, it's like, gosh, I really need to do that, especially now that I'm training seriously. Last week I ran 28 miles, didn't miss a day, ran all 7 days, ran 28 miles total for the week. Lost 18 pounds now year to date. Came into the year weighing 192, I'm down to 174. I get under 170, brah, I'm racing. I got 5 to go. But my point of this with Carrie D and her recommendation is that I do need to stay hydrated as I train very hardly every morning. So if you'll excuse me for just a second, I have brought some water up with me per the advice given from one of our viewers, Carrie D, down in Georgia. That's great advice. That water is so refreshing, especially after, I ran 5 miles this morning. Then I stacked some wood and then some other stuff, whatever. Okay, so here's the story. When I first moved to the Philippines, I went there on vacation. I never meant to move there, but of course, as you know, I met my beautiful bride dearly, aka Giggly Girl, fell in love. Next thing you know, there for 6 years. But I didn't meet dearly until after I'd been there for about 3 months. I went on some dates with some other girls, but they just didn't seem to be the ones, especially the first one. And I'm going to save you the gory details. I got involved with a scammer. I got involved with a beautiful young girl who just viewed me as like a bank. It was an uncomfortable situation. Fortunately, it only lasted a couple of weeks. I met an American, an early 60-something-year-old man from Kentucky, whose name was Rick. This was in Bohol, which is in the Visayas. This is the first place I visited there. Let me tell you first about Rick's girlfriend, because that's who I saw first. Okay, so when I went there, the first hotel I would ever stay in, I stayed for about a week. And I remember going into the hotel, and the girl working at the front desk was like the most absolute gorgeous, young woman, one of them that I'd ever seen. She was in her early 20s, and she was just drop dead gorgeous, to the point to where when I was checking into that hotel, I had this girl I was dating with me, and she didn't take too kindly to the fact that I was, being kind of friendly to this lady. There was some jealousy there, but I understand. And I wasn't being disrespectful to the girl I was dating. It was hard not to just gawk at this girl. That's how gorgeous she was. So I got checked into my hotel where I stayed for a week, and that first week was rough. Here I thought, I was going to be alone with this girl I was dating, and I'll admit it. I'm just going to tell you guys and girls, listen, I met her online. Now, I didn't go there to meet this woman. I knew I was going there, and I met her online before I went. I thought, well, why not, have somebody waiting on me when I get there, right? Famous last great idea. It didn't work out. She was a scammer. She was a fleecer. This is way off topic, but I'm going to tell you because I've had other guys approach me and talk to me about their experiences, either good or bad, or out of curiosity, about life in the Philippines, or being married to a Filipino or dating a Filipina. This is what I will tell you. The Philippines is a wonderful country, and Filipinos are wonderful people. The majority of them, like people all over the world in any country I've ever visited, are great people, okay? But there's some scammers, and they like hanging out online. So if you're divorced, you're widowed or something like this, and you thought, man, I watch this guy's videos, and he's got this pretty little wife named Dearly, aka Giggly Girl, and they seem to have such a wonderful relationship, and wow, you're entertaining the idea. My advice to you is go there. Don't do the online crap, because I know people who have met ladies online, and they've had a wonderful ever after story that's been great. They're in the minority. The majority of the folks who do that online thing, they're getting scammed. I'm going to tell you, and this is way off topic too, but this is how it works. They'll use those pretty young ladies to get you hooked, and after you've chatted a couple times, they're gone. They'll give you, oh, my camera doesn't work, let's just chat anyway. You're talking to their uncle. You're talking to somebody, you and 6 other guys, and they're telling you some sob story, send me money, and you're sending it. You're getting taken advantage of. It's just, that's the situation I found myself in here this first go round, right? Every evening, somebody from the family, somebody from the village is coming to the hotel, asking to speak with this girl, and of course they're looking for money. And about halfway through that week, I'm down in the lobby, and I see this guy, Rick, from Kentucky, early 60s, and I noticed he had been sitting there most days at some point. And I go over to him and I said, are you an American? He says, I am. I'm Rick from Kentucky. And I said, hey, I'm Kevin from Virginia. I said, how long have you been over here in the Philippines? He says, well, off and on for more than 30 years. And I said, so you kind of understand the culture and a lot of stuff? He goes, yeah, I do. I speak their languages too, Tagalog and Visayan, because we were down in the Visayas. And I said, can I ask you a question? Or can I talk to you for a minute? He goes, yeah, what's going on? And I said, I think I'm being scammed, but I'm not sure. He threw his head back with laughter. Funniest thing in the world. He goes, you finally figured it out? I've been sitting here in the lobby seeing you getting scammed every day. I've been seeing her family coming in, looking for money every day. And I'm like, are you staying here in this hotel too? And he goes, no. He says, you see that girl up at the desk? And he points at her, this gorgeous woman that I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the video. Well, not really at the beginning, but a few minutes into it. I go, yeah, she's hot. He goes, well, that's my girlfriend. I was like, no way. He goes, yeah. He goes, I come here towards the end of the day to pick her up when she gets off shift, to take her home. And I've just been watching these people down here. They're like, there's 8 of them down here making these plans. They figure out who's going to go up, who's going to say what. And then that one person goes up and they come down with money, laughing, high-fiving each other, and they're going out partying. Carrie D in Georgia, thank you so much for reminding me to drink water because I'm finding myself to be a bit parched. Excuse me for just a second. Much better. So I'm like, what do I do? He goes, look. He goes, more than likely, the family's put her up to it. Somebody's pressured her. She might be an okay girl. She's worth a second chance. And he'd seen her, and she was gorgeous. He says, but here's what you got to do. You got to go to a private resort that's gated so those people can't just come in. It's going to be you and her. That's the only way you're going to have a chance to figure out, if you want to stay with her. He says, you need to check out of this hotel, check into that resort immediately, give it a second try. I thought, well, okay. So I did. The girl I was dating wasn't very happy about it, and I didn't understand it because we got to this resort and it was nice. It was right on the bay. It was on the ocean. We were on the beach. It was a very expensive resort by Filipino standards, and it was quite pricey by American standards. But I had the money. I just finished an 18-month deployment, a year in Iraq, 6 months in the Army hospital, money piling up in the bank because I didn't have any rent, room, board, none of that stuff. The Army was covering all that. I just had to go out there and, get shot at and blown up, attempted to be blown up and all that stuff to get it. So whatever, I had it. She didn't seem very happy with the accommodations, even though to me, I felt like I was at the Outer Banks of North Carolina, because you had a resort and then they had these little houses that were privately owned. And that's the house we lived in. It was salmon colored. It was the only salmon colored house in this resort. And so we stayed there. And, long story short, I know, too late. Didn't work out. She just kept, fleecing me. And I just said, we're done. It's over. Go. And I then, of course, went to Manila. I was going to fly home. Met my friend Ray from England, who said, no. He says, come with me back to Davao, down to Mindanao. Let me introduce you to some wonderful ladies that I'm personal friends with that I don't think would be like this. And that's how I met Dearly. People have often asked, how have I met Dearly? Well, our friend Ray introduced us. Ray and Dearly had been friends for about a year. And this is when I saw the true Philippines. I was prepared to come home and say, they're all scammers. No, they're not. They're not. The overwhelming majority of them are just like the overwhelming majority of everybody in every other country. They're wonderful people. I just fell in with some that were not so wonderful. Okay. Dearly she has been, her family's wonderful. We're close, all of them. I've seen her parents cry because they miss me when we've talked, FaceTime, which we do regularly. They haven't seen me in almost 6 years and they've come to tears over that. And it's genuine, it's true, it's real, and they never ask for anything. There's been times we've helped in situations of emergency because we knew they couldn't cover their need, so we did. And even then, they didn't ask. They're wonderful people, like the majority of the people over there. So we broke up. I met Dearly, living happily ever after. Stayed there for 5 years after that. Ended up coming back to the U.S., getting an apartment over here, getting back on the radar, got my driver's license back, started filing taxes, paying taxes again. Because I'd vanished and I really didn't think I was ever going to come home, but I did. And started the visa process to get Dearly over here. Daniel, of course, was already born. He was 5 by the time we got here to the U.S. We got here 3 months before he started kindergarten. Perfect timing, because that was one of our main concerns, to have our son, educated here. And then the ultimate goal, of course, is to go back and forth to both places once we don't have that hassle of him having to be in school for 9 months a year, which is a wonderful thing because it's why we came. So anyway, I was here alone for 6 months in the U.S., here in Virginia, got everything set up. The U.S. government approved Dearly's visa. They did a thorough investigation. She was not a criminal. She was not a terrorist. She was who she said she was. She was not married to somebody else already. Gave her a full approval to come over. So I went back to the Philippines to get her and Daniel. Ended up being stuck, of course, for 6 months before we were able to come over. That's another story for another time. I went over in November, and my attorney here told me, you'll be home in time for Christmas. And I was like, dude, I don't think you know how things can work. Whatever. We didn't get home in time for Christmas. We got home the day before taxes were due the following April 14th. Got home just in time to send a butt ton of money off to the IRS. But we finally got here. So our son's birthday's in January. So here it was January. We were living in a place called Makati City. It's in Manila, a very nice place. Wonderful. I had no problems there. We were a block away from the Filipino Stock Exchange. You know, like the New York Stock Exchange? Same thing. That's where we were. Beautiful place. Wonderful people. Had great experiences there. But we would island hop. You know, we had the finances to do it. We were doing really well back then. Geez, Carrie D down there in Georgia. I don't know how I ever got through these long-winded videos without having my water or coffee up here. I guess because I just wasn't training as seriously as I do now. So anyway, we went to Boracay, which is one of their most, famous, well-known tourist spots. Beautiful white sandy beaches, crystal blue waters, gorgeous. But on our son's birthday, we went to Bohol, because here are the two main attractions in Bohol. There are these landforms called the Chocolate Hills. There are 1,776 of them. It's easy to remember that because that's the year, of course, of our independence. And then there's this tiny mammal called the tarsier. It's about this big. Once upon a time, they were everywhere, but now they're only located, at least so it's said, on the Isle of Bohol. I've said that in other videos, and other people have said they're also in Malaysia. I believe it. It's the same type of climate and environment. So they're probably in Indonesia as well. But at the time, they were supposedly only in Bohol. They're the cutest little things. Google it after this video, called tarsier. They have these big old eyes, and they kind of look like a cross between a gerbil and a monkey, and they have these really long fingers, and they move very slowly, and there's a certain tree they live in because they eat the leaves. So we decided we would spend Daniel's 5th birthday in Bohol to go see the Chocolate Hills, go see the tarsier, which we did, and it was wonderful. Make sure you're getting my 6. I'm not so sure we're alone in these woods today. It is October. So we get there. I go back to that resort. I'm like, let's stay at this resort. And dearly knew the backstory of this relationship I had with this girl. Man, what a scammer. She was just a scammer. I'm just going to call it like it is. We ended up getting the same little house, the same little beach house. It was a salmon colored house. It was the only one there that was salmon. I was like, wow, how ironic is this? It was privately owned. This is the way the resort worked. They had like condos that the resort owned, but you could buy some of these little houses as like investment properties. I mentioned earlier the Outer Banks of the Philippines. It's very similarly done the same way. Like you can buy a beach house, as you know, and you can stay in it, I think, up to 3 weeks a year. But yet rent it out for like vacation properties, and it counts as a rental. But if you if you stay in it more than 3 weeks a year, it's like a primary residence, and you don't get all those special tax write-offs or whatever. So that was the same situation here, and it was privately owned, and I would soon come to find out who it was privately owned by, and here's how. We get there, we fly down from Manila, we check in. Dearly wanted to go get a bunch of food for the room. I was like, all right, go outside the gate, take a right, and there's like a mall down the road. I remember this from when I've been there before. And in the Philippines, the grocery stores are actually in the mall. Like usually half of the bottom part of the mall is a grocery store, and then they got all the department stores and boutiques and all that. So I said, go there. And we had driven right by it in the taxi on the way from the airport. I said, I'm tired from just flying, and I just want to hang out here. She's like, okay. So her and Daniel go to the mall to get some food. I'd planned on taking a nap, but I just couldn't sleep. And so I thought, well, I'm going to walk out and see the ocean. So I leave this little salmon-colored house. I walk outside, and across the walkway from me, there's a bench with a palm tree. And there's Rick from Kentucky sitting on that bench. And I was like, OMG, Rick? He's like, Kevin. I was like, wow, I haven't seen you in like 5 years. He's like, yeah, it's been a while. And I'm like, where's that smoking hot girlfriend you had? Is she here with you? And he shook his head. He goes, nah, that didn't end up so well. That didn't go the way I wanted it. And I was like, well, what happened? And by the way, here's Rick's story. Rick had been married to a beautiful Filipina lady for almost 30 years. That's why he'd been going back and forth for 30 years. He wasn't one of these sex tourists. These stereotypes you guys hear are just that, stereotypes. That's crap. I don't know how I think a lot of those stories originated from when we had naval bases then, and the Navy guys would go out and play when they had, in Subic Bay, and then they come home and they talk about how. That's where it begins and that's where it ends. Let me tell you this, because I researched this, I Googled this. Filipinas have the highest rate of virginity outside of marriage of any other women in Asia, if not the world. Yeah. So for everybody, oh, they're, all these bad. No, they're not. No, they're not. You've listened to a stereotype based upon some whoremonger Navyman who used to go out on pass on the weekends. That's the truth of it. That's the truth of it. So, anyway, where was I? There's so much I could say if I didn't have to wear velvet handcuffs on social media. That's why I write books. Because I can say it in the books. Because thank God, free speech is still protected in literature. At least for now. So here's Rick's story. His wife, with whom he had a couple of kids, she got cancer. And so they used to go back and forth to the Philippines and Kentucky, same way me and our family wants to go back and forth from the Philippines and Virginia when our kids out of school. They decided, if this was the end, she had less than a year, they were going to go back to the Philippines so she could be with her, biological family and all that. She ended up living for almost 4 years, and Rick said it was probably because she was happy to be back, etc., etc. She died, and he just didn't feel like coming home for a while, so he stayed over there for a while. Came back to Kentucky. His kids were grown, didn't have time for him, and he's like, man, this sucks. So he went back to the Philippines just to go on vacation, and that's when he met this beautiful girl that was working. That sounded like something just got caught by a Black Panther. Keep watching my 6, okay? So anyway, he told me, he said, look, I'm not a dumbass. There's no reason why this beautiful 22-year-old girl should fall in love with like a 63-year-old, average-looking guy. But he said he fell in love with her. He made it clear to her up front, look, I know the game. You're not going to scam me. You're not going to fleece me. I'm not supporting your village. I'm not supporting your family outside of an emergency that I know they can't cover. As long as I see with my eyes that this emergency is real. Wise man. He'd been over there for 30 years. Now, he knew the game. She was all for it. And they just had this relationship, and it started going well until local congressman saw her. He was staying in the hotel where she worked, and he liked her, and he decided she was going to be his mistress. He offered to bankroll not just her, but the family and the village. And I'm not judging her decision. I'm not judging her. I know that when I'm hungry, I can eat. I know that in my house I have food. I know if I'm downtown and I get hungry, I can afford to stop at any restaurant and eat any meal I want to eat. I will not judge people who cannot say the same thing. I will not judge someone who is genuinely hungry. And that comes from having been genuinely hungry myself and not being able to access food for the first time in my life, which was in the Philippines. So a very big part of me understands why this girl became that congressman's mistress. Well, the congressman, like a lot of wealthy or powerful people do, put her up in a house, private house, where he could bankroll her and come see her for his conjugal visits, I guess they would call it. It happened to be that he owned that little salmon house on that resort. That's where she lived. So she broke up with Rick, took up residence at this house. Rick would go by to try to see her, to try to change her mind. Even though he knew she made a decision based on money, he was in love with this girl and he didn't want to give her up. Well, Rick told me about a year after he had met me, this girl became pregnant with the congressman's kid. She had a little boy, and it would be a few years after that, about the year before I actually left the Philippines and went back to get my family. She was walking across the street, her little boy in one hand, cell phone in the other, checking her social media, how many people gave a thumbs up or a like to her last selfie, to help build her confidence. They got hit by a bus. The little boy was killed instantly. She was hospitalized, later released, went back to the salmon-colored house at their resort, and she would die at the... That's a bird. She died because of complications from her injuries in that house. I was like, man, that's a sad story. I told Rick, that is such a sad story. And he said, you're staying there? I said, yeah. He said, would you mind if I went in there one last time? I was like, okay, sure, come on in. So I open the door, we go in. He's walking around. I step back out onto the porch, seeing the sun on the ocean, the beach, the palm tree, all that stuff, just taking in the view, giving him time for himself, by himself. A few minutes pass. I'm like, well, he's got to be done. This isn't a big place. I go in there, I'm looking. He's not there. I go back outside. He's not there. He's not on his bench. He's gone. And I thought, well, obviously it was too overwhelming for him. He couldn't, stand being back in the place, the last residence of the woman that he loved. He took off. So Dearly and Daniel were still at the grocery store up there at the mall. So I figured, well, I'll walk over here to the club. They have an outside restaurant, bar. I went over. I got a Sprite to wait for my family to get back. I saw a couple guys. I think they were, white guys. I think one was from England and one was from Canada. I just went over and said, hey, can I join you guys? So I sat down. They're drinking beer. And we're small talking. They're like, so what are you a tourist? I'm like, nah, I lived here for 6 years. Went back home, got the visa thing ready. I'm here waiting for the Philippines to give approval for her to leave so we can go live happily ever after. And then right outside of Charlottesville, Virginia. And they said, where are you staying? And I told them, a little salmon-colored house. And I told them it's so ironic I stayed there like 6 years ago when I was first here. But when I said salmon-colored house, they both looked at each other like this, like, I'll remember always. I was like, so what about you guys? Are you tourists? Do you live here? They said, no, we're expats. We live here. We've been over here 12 years or whatever. I said, well, you might know Rick from Kentucky. I just saw him. And they, again, I'm like, I met him when I was here 6 years ago, and he helped me out, and I told him how he helped me out. They're like, when did you see, you said you just saw Rick, when did you see him? And I told him, and I gave him the short version of the story I just told you, sitting on the bench and all that. And they said, Rick got killed about 6 months ago. And I said, how? They said, well, he was dating some girl that was like the mistress of a congressman that was staying in that place. She even had a kid with the congressman, but Rick would sneak around, he'd hang out with them. And they got hit by a bus. The kid and Rick were killed instantly. The woman, she lived. She stayed in the hospital for a few months. She came back here, and then she died less than a month later. See you next time for more.